And recording is in progress. All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Lindsay Matz Benson. I use she, her pronouns. I am the team lead for the professional development on the Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee through ACRL. That is a mouthful. In my normal everyday work, I lead the teaching and learning program at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. And today I'm joined by these wonderful panelists, as well as other members of the Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee. I have Piper, Helene, Hannah, and Katie, and they are all going to be speaking for one after another today. And then we're going to save some Q&A for the end. If you want to put that in chat, that is perfectly fine. We can maybe answer some things along the way, as well as at the end, our panelists will come in and present. We already have a hand raised. If you want to put your question in chat, I think that might be the easiest. And otherwise, I'm assuming that everybody can hear and see us okay. And you can also just free to direct message me any technical issues you have as well. So I am going to hand this over to Piper, who is the instruction librarian at Auburn University. So take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Piper Cumbo. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Information Literacy Instruction Coordinator and Instruction Librarian at Auburn University Libraries. I have been in my current role for 2.5 years. And in this role, I get to participate in more research projects and teaching opportunities than I have in my previous just instruction librarian roles. So in this particular academic year, I have really flexed that new role in being involved in 3 IRB approved projects involving Generation Z as the participants and examining various information literacy questions, research questions, and they're seeking information, seeking help, space. And so I do have some slides to share to talk about these projects. Bear with me. Okay. So my first project, this one began last year. This is really, we were examining our EDS layer on our website. We call it Discovery, and we subscribe to the EBSCO EDS. And so as the primary investigator and the instruction coordinator at the time, I was really examining how first-year students approach a discovery layer on a website before there's any information literacy instruction. We had a 10% increase in student enrollment last year. And so I was particularly interested in how these students were seeking information on our website, where they went on our website, what their thought process was. And so this used the Think Aloud methodology, where we gave students 5 known item tasks and recorded them with screen capturing software. And we used not just our website, but 2 additional websites that utilize the same software, the same EDS EBSCO software, to see what students preferred about one or the other, what felt more intuitive to them. So these are our questions that we were really seeking to ask. And in our findings, we found that students, when they were given these known item tasks, they would type them out word for word in the search box. So you can see in this screenshot, the print version of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. That happened multiple times. They would type them out exact. They did not like and did not understand library jargon. So if a library's user interface for their discovery had any kind of labels like catalog, they told us about it. They wanted consistent names in the labels. They wanted it to be very clear that this is where you look for books, this is where you look for articles. They really liked clean interfaces. They felt that it was really important to have facets and filters. So we were really pleased to see that, because again, these students had not had any kind of introduction to the library website in any class. You know, in the pre-test survey, they were asked, have you used the library website? Have you met with the librarian? And so we weeded them with that process in mind. And so we found, you know, with these findings, with their feedback in both a post-study survey and with the screen capturing, that they really do approach these web interfaces with this mental model. And I'm sure we're going to hear about this from our colleagues from the Ohio State. I'm really looking forward to hearing them. So these mental models are certainly in place in these students, and this is, you know, essentially like what they believe about a system as they engage in it. And so they believe that this is going to, that our discovery layer was going to behave like Google. So they would type in a number, like the number 2 instead of the word 2, and so on. So it was just really like they just assumed that it was the same thing was kind of going to take place. We also gleaned from this study that they don't like any kind of filters on the right side of a screen. They don't really look to the right side that often. And this was after the recording that I asked one student, after we were seeing this consistent response that they weren't looking to the right, they were looking to the left. Why is that? He replied that that was because ads are on web pages typically on the right. So with that in mind, you know, when we're designing these platforms and thinking about where filters might go, where navigation tools might go, I found that interesting that they're really focused on that left side. Another study that I was involved in, it was just me this time, as an instruction librarian and the information literacy instruction coordinator. I work with not only freshmen, but those English composition courses that may have, you know, other level students in them, but the majority of the time they are first year students. So I'm in these classes in the capacity of an instruction librarian, conducting both in-person, asynchronous, and also I oversee the synchronous modules that are embedded in their platform. So I oversee all information literacy instruction for these classes. And I was in one particular class and I was noticing the software that they're using in their LMS is a social annotation software. And having taught a credit-bearing course that utilized social annotation software for the course readings, I thought this is really interesting to see, you know, how students in the long term are using this software in an English composition course. And also, could I possibly design something using this software for a one-shot in this instruction capacity? And so before I get to the, you know, one-shot element, I wanted to see what the students thought of the social annotation software, if they felt that it helped them identify and understand scholarly literature, because that was the context with which they were using it. They had these assignments, these articles related to their topics in class that were really in depth and granular, as you know, scholarly literature can be. And the students were getting prompts from the instructor, and they were annotating within the text and responding to each other's annotations in evaluating the content, understanding the content in the context of the class discussion. So I created the survey and asked them to participate with the survey and offered them gift cards for their participation. That's key to a lot of these studies. And I had 5 responses to an interest in responding to the study. So in these surveys, students, you know, I used the information literacy self-efficacy scale for the survey. And students were able to kind of, measure essentially their beliefs about their own information literacy skills. And I also gave them some open-ended questions to answer for the qualitative side, to let me know, how they felt about the essay, about the social annotation tools, using those to decipher and evaluate scholarly literature. And so what I found is that, of course, like these students, and this is consistent also in the discovery study that I did, students feel very confident in their ability to search for sources, to engage with tools. They feel very confident in their search strategies and keywords. They feel confident in writing research papers. But once you get into the nitty-gritty of determining like how to use a source for an assignment, they're not as confident. They would admit in the recordings, both for the discovery layer and in this survey, that their confidence would kind of slide as they had to evaluate the materials on their own, and determine how this source might be used in their paper. And again, these are all freshmen, and that makes sense. Like they're novices, they're starting their journeys in academic literature and academic research. But that really kind of helped me determine best instruction approaches as well. Going back to this social annotation study, they did find the software to help them in retaining and evaluating the information. They found that the process of commenting, annotating on their peers' annotations, that's the social element of this annotation tool, really helped them retain this information. It helped them identify it. Here are two of the annotations that they let me use for my study. They understood a little bit more about scholarship, about authority. Scholarship as a conversation would be a great ACRL frame to use for maybe a one-shot using this tool. And this was the prompt that the instructor used, guiding them, through the process of reading this scholarly article and making sure that these annotations were thoughtful and intentional in their answers. One of the questions for this survey, do you agree that using the social annotation software increased the effectiveness of your learning? Overwhelmingly, they said yes. I realize now the font did not come through very well on this slide, but this was one of the quotes. I would say it helps me slow down and really look into and evaluate the information given. And that was where their confidence, again, was like a little shaky. They just really needed to make sure they were finding sources that were right. I think that was some of it too. And so they really liked the process of being able to go back and reread. Another study that I'm involved in, though I am not the PI, is related to LibGuides, but we're going to hear from Helene about her studies. And so I cannot wait to hear about that, because we're in the process right now of analyzing this data. And this is where we compared the usage of LibGuides and an Adobe Express page. We are an Adobe campus here at Auburn, and so a lot of librarians are utilizing the Adobe web pages for their research guides. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity to do a cross comparison and see how students were doing in finding the same information across these platforms, and what they preferred. So we're getting into that. And upcoming, I'm working with the instructor for the social annotations process. So we'll do more of a source analysis in the fall. So that's going to be really good. We're working towards the multimodal assignments, and again, in English composition, and the social annotation process will be continued as well. So I wanted to hurry through and get to the others, but that's it for now.
All right. Thank you so much, Piper. That was so interesting. Helene, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Piper, for sharing. That was really, really interesting. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helene Gold. I am the STEM librarian at University of Kentucky. I've only been here for a few months. My main liaison areas are in the College of Engineering and Earth and Environmental Sciences, but I have been shaking my tiny angry fist about LibGuides for a long time. And I presented at LOEX in 2022 on this topic. And I have been sort of gathering up more momentum and steam to at some point do a study. I'm not there yet, but I am sure getting there. So in the meantime, I want to share with you yeah, LibGuides, like whatever. Using LibGuides to meet students where they are and not where we want them to be. I'm going to time myself, and I'm also have some prepared remarks, because if I don't have prepared remarks, I will ramble, and I do not want to do that. So our overview, what I want to talk about today, mainly, how do Gen Z students meet their information needs? What do they need from us? Why we're stuck in a LibGuide rut of outdated web design, a fire hose approach to information sharing, and a struggle to meet students where they are, and how we can do better by focusing our skills, processes, services, and pedagogy. Okay, Gen Z information seeking. What do we know? So we know that they're collaborative. They have very strong online social connections, but these platforms with these connections rely heavily on influenced algorithms that tend to favor influences and have varying degrees of credibility and veracity. Our personal social networks heavily inform our beliefs, our political and social beliefs, and these beliefs can be very, very fixed. Additionally, Gen Z researchers are very efficient, and they want to complete work in as few steps as possible. Again, the path of least resistance. But with library research, this can lead to superficial sourcing when outside information is required for an academic paper or an assignment. Gen Z, very, very self-reliant, combined with being very efficient, will use tools that look and feel familiar, like Google, to locate sources, and definitely not our lengthy subject level LibGuides with bulleted lists and curated resources. Our Gen Z folks are hesitant to ask for help, usually unless they know us from in a class or having seen us in the library, might not reach out for a consultation. As we know, even when their professors encourage them, they are often hesitant to reach out for help. So of course, we know the main platforms where Gen Z students are socially connected are TikTok and Instagram, but this is where Gen Z students will obtain information as well. So we know that the infinite scroll of never-ending content keeps us all captivated for hours, but students use these to find information relevant to their day-to-day lives, like finding product reviews for like clothing, restaurants, and businesses. And I know all of us follow businesses, look for reviews, we follow libraries. We also use these platforms for information purposes. So what do we know about our students' research behavior? So from the literature, we know that librarians and faculty perceptions of student research skills are fairly negative. And this is mostly attributed to student reporting, self-report, students' overconfidence, their perceptions of overconfidence, but it's documented in studies that students' own perceptions of their research skills. So what about students' perceptions of their day-to-day research skills? So an interesting study from Reference Service Reviews shows that Gen Z students are strongly motivated by curiosity and problem solving, like trying to better understand a medical diagnosis or maybe doing research around immigration laws. And again, the social connections and influence of relationships, they influence their information seeking process so that they will check with multiple sources, multiple people to make what they believe is the most informed decision, rather than conducting research as a solitary researcher. So the conclusion of this study aligns with my own teaching philosophy, that we meet students where they are, right? That we welcome students into the structured scholarly conversation by explicitly making connections between the foundations of research skills that they already have, and the information environment they're already in, to the skills that they'll need to learn to be successful in college, and hopefully in their future world of work. So the authors summarize, librarians need to make explicit connections between everyday search experiences to academic research, to value what students bring to higher education, making those cognitive bridges to help students transfer their knowledge to an academic research setting. So we need to emphasize what students already know what to do and not emphasize their deficits in our library instruction. They've been hearing from us for years to not use Wikipedia, to not use ChatGPT, but both these resources absolutely play a role in the research process, especially around lateral reading for fact-checking, and for generating ideas for topics and keyword search strategies. So acknowledging that research is an iterative, nonlinear, messy, frustrating process, just like wading through a million Amazon reviews or making sense of conflicting health or nutrition information, we want to ask students to choose. So when we ask students to choose a paper topic from a list of broad subjects, and then we ask them to formulate a search strategy, and then search a library database, and then choose an article to synthesize into their writing, it's not an effective way to introduce and welcome, especially first-year students, to the world of structured academic research, but we don't have control over assignments that ask them to do exactly this, to conduct research in this very step-by-step linear process. But what we can do is create lessons and conversations that acknowledge students' existing skills and experiences and find ways to translate that into working with traditionally published sources. I was delighted to discover, this was a wonderful discovery I just made a couple of weeks ago, that librarians Erica Dufresne and Leslie Salt, they're fellow alums of the Evidence Synthesis Institute program, are presenting their findings this Wednesday in 2 days from their recent scoping review of LibGuide's effectiveness for learning. So I reached out to them a few days ago to ask for some summary information to share, and they did. They ask, with so much time spent building and maintaining library research guides, is there any evidence on their effectiveness for learning? So they identified many gaps between how the library field touts library best practices, what actual existing evidence exists to support these assertions. And while a significant number of studies highlight positive user perceptions, the interpretation of effectiveness remains ambiguous due to the lack of clearly defined expectations or benchmarks for impact assessment. Additionally, I want to add, they found very few measurable outcomes throughout the 61 studies that met the inclusion criteria. Okay. So having said all that, this is how what we know about Gen Z research behavior can inform how we design and develop LibGuides. The next few slides are from the 2022 LOEX presentation that my colleague Ulla Lechtenberg at University of Pitt and I presented, this is us 2 years ago at LOEX. And this is where I now invite you to air your grievances. So the airing of the grievances. I am going to share an interactive poll that I would like us all to participate in. So I believe you can see my Mentimeter. So if you can all go to menti.com and enter this code and tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. How do you feel? When Ula and I offered this feedback at LOEX 2022, it was quite the forum. And so I look forward to seeing, and this is anonymous, so you can enter your text and it will appear here on this screen. Here we go. Ugh, yes, ugh, that is the correct response. So does anyone really look at a list of links? Oh, I'm going to talk about that. Right? They're for librarians and not students. Oh, these are all the things. No accountability. It's frustrating, right? There's no standardization. Right. And this is the thing. What else do we have? We don't have control over our websites. What else can we do? So someone says too much work for it to not work. A colleague of mine the other day said, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And I tend to agree in a lot of ways, right? Is this, let me make sure that this is, everyone can see all the results. Oh, sorry, I'm not scrolling down. How can I convince my colleagues that their guides are too long? I don't know. I just, oh, we have a love. There's a LibGuide love. Many, I know, they're battles, right? LibGuides for everything. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's a LibGuide. There's a LibGuide for everything. So you can see that these reflect how we feel, the frustration, right? Right. When they're targeted resources. Thank you. We're going to talk about that as well. Right. LibGuides take a lot. They are. They take a lot of work to make them attractive, easy to use. Right. Yeah, in theory, right? In theory, so many things are okay, but in practice, not so much. So we're all having this universal experience. Right. As a new librarian, I'm getting pushback from senior librarians about standardizing LibGuide design and strategy. I feel your pain. I'm not a new librarian and I'm still getting pushback. It's very frustrating. Students don't use them. I mean, they don't. And we're going to talk about all of this. A lot of effort to create. So we're having the similar experience, right? The juice is just not worth the squeeze. So I appreciate you sharing all that. And I think the most important thing we can get out of this is that we are all having the same experience. There's a lot of frustration and there's a lot of time and energy and effort that goes into something that isn't really being used as much as we want it to be used. So I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay. So there's a lot of LibGuides out there. There are so many guides out there. So at our presentation at LOEX, we discussed how popular the platform is. There are almost 1 million guides in the world right now, which doesn't surprise me. I reached out to SpringShare a few days ago. But as we've lost control over our library website, right, it's been replaced by uniform CMS-driven sites. LibGuides give us places where we have control, where we can demonstrate our work, and our work has value. And sometimes, though, we use them as knee-jerk reactions to current events. And I dare you to go ahead and Google LibGuide and Eclipse. You will not be disappointed. So here's a trip down memory lane using the Wayback Machine. This goes back to 1999. Some of us remember this really, really well. When Yahoo was a hierarchical directory of topics and resources, So the use of these types of subject guides have their origin story back at MIT in the 1970s when they developed print pathfinders. And they were developed to provide assistance with the initial stages of research. And librarians have used this Pathfinder resource list, like directory model, literally for decades. So before SpringShare's LibGuide sprang into existence in 2007, we transitioned, and this was when I was at Eckerd College back in the day, from print pathfinders to creating curated subject guides. And my own usability studies at the time indicated that students weren't really using these unless they were introduced in library instruction and they were tied directly to the assignment. I knew this 25 years ago. Even though students didn't know what these were, they didn't know why we were using them. They weren't using them then, they're not using them now. We still spent a huge amount of time and effort making them. And so why? Because the open web was a hot mess. It's not a hot mess now, but the Google algorithmic search was still about 10 years off at this point. So LibGuides, now, they were built on this long-standing model of helping students navigate an overwhelming amount of information. So I created this guide in 1999, and at the time, there were very few websites that professors would let students use. So we would list the 3 or 4 of them that were acceptable and had been vetted by librarians for use. But the problem is these mega lists, right? These lists, and again, this is, about 2000, 2001 here, linked to more lists and mega lists, requiring students to slog through hundreds of sites, hoping to stumble on the exact information that they needed. No one searched like that then, and no one searches like that now. So here we are in 2015. And this is just 9 years ago. And this book states that studies show that LibGuides are often difficult, confusing, or overwhelming, causing users to give up and just fall back on search engines like Google. I mean, the author isn't wrong, right? They use solid instructional, user, and web design principles to create LibGuides that are more appealing than Google for our earliest Gen Z students. But they knew that Google was faster, Google was more efficient, and it retrieved good enough results. I'm getting lost in my notes. Okay, so here we are in 2024, still to this day, curating lists of websites and journal titles and books for our students, intentionally blurred to protect the innocent among us. These lists don't meet learners' immediate research needs, and they mostly serve as a way of demonstrating our resources and maybe our own expertise to, demonstrate to our bosses and our faculty colleagues that we're trying to engage students with our academic resources. And again, usability studies show universally that learners do not browse lists in hopes of finding a relevant resource. But we seem to be compelled to keep creating guides based on frameworks and processes that center the information and not the learner. So most of us are not trained in pedagogical practices, and it's really only in the last few years that courses in pedagogy or instructional design have been offered as electives in graduate library science curriculum. But there's a huge body of research that we can use to inform us how our students learn, how we can be better teachers, and how we can create better websites for teaching and learning. Many of us lack formal teacher training or access to professional development funding, or the time or even the support from our supervisors and maybe our colleagues to develop these skills. So how are we supposed to break free from decades-long paradigm of creating lists of sources? So I ask us to do some pretty simple things. If we're going to keep making LibGuides, because of course we're going to keep making LibGuides, we need to treat them like the websites that they are and use basic principles of student-centered web design for learning, as well as ensuring that all of our guides are usable on cell phones through responsive design, which the Spring Share platform actually does really well, because yes, students are doing their work on their cell phones. So I've taught in Canvas over the years, and the app is actually really well designed and really easy to use. And this is where we can have an impact in using and designing LibGuides at the class and assignment level to share highly relevant information and tools and resources at the time of need embedded directly into the course. So unlike subject guides, which should serve really only as a way to broadly introduce learners to subject-specific databases and tools, course and assignment guides should be heavily edited and contain only the resources and the tools that students need to complete the work. More is not better. Resist, I beg you from the bottom of my librarian heart, resist the temptation to include resources and services that we think learners need to know about. Include only the ones that give learners exactly what they need when they need it. Okay, so notice, I love this guide. Notice that this guide developed by my colleague who is the nursing librarian. It has no tabs. There are no tabs on this guide. It is rather designed to serve a specific group of learners and researchers. Users can quickly choose the group they belong to, quickly choose the services they need, or jump directly to the database, an all-in-one page. It's like the first page of Google results, but for our resources. This guide, developed by another one of my colleagues here at UK, also has no tabs and is even more streamlined, offers support for specific services using pull-down menus for specific databases and exam prep materials. So these guides display beautifully on a cell phone. The responsive design creates a seamless, uncluttered scrolling web page. I've been at the University of Kentucky now for about 5 months. I inherited 100 guides in the area of engineering, and my first job was to unpublish about 90 of them, quickly paring them down. And this summer, and we say this every spring, right? Every April and May, we say this summer, I will be using these guides to inform my redesign work, because this summer is going to be what? It's going to be the summer of LibGuides. This is going to be the summer that it all happens. So in conclusion, Business Cat has recommendations. Okay, so finally, LibGuides are websites, right? We need to design them as such. Use fewer than 5 tabs, maybe no tabs at all. Subject guides and course assignment guides serve different purposes. Both must be learner-centered teaching tools. Don't link to print materials, please. Focus on skills and databases, not individual sources. Teach from them. Emphasize them in instruction. Emphasize that you created them for the specific class or the assignment. And finally, acknowledge that students' existing unstructured research skills translate into structured academic research. Celebrate what they know. Don't focus on what they don't. Obligatory bibliography, obligatory bibliography. And I somehow feel that this is the vibe I should leave you with. So that is what I'm going to leave you with. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helene. I laughed a lot, and I hope you saw all the emojis going
I
on.
laughed, I cried.
It's pretty amazing. All right, for our last panel, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. Let's turn it over to our wonderful colleagues from The Ohio State University.
Katie, that's your beautiful background, not our slides. You're taking us on a vacation. I can see this now. There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I could not unmute and then share things, but all right.
I understand. So typically I keep looking for a little bit longer. We're going to get started talking about information behaviors and Gen Z pre and post COVID-19. So you can follow along with us if you want. Some of our slides live here, as well as the rest of our data. And so I'm going to toss this into the chat right now, but you can grab the QR code or wander over to this link. And we will post this again later. If you're like, wait a second, I didn't grab that. Don't worry. We got you. We got you hooked up. To start off with, I'm Hannah Primo. I'm the instructional designer for the Ohio State University Libraries.
And I'm Katie Bloxage. I'm the library director at The Ohio State University at Newark.
So real quickly, what to expect. We're going to give some background, emergency online teaching, Gen Z, who are they? What are they? What are emotions? We're going to go into our actual study and results, what we did, how we did it, and what we learned. And then finally, we're going to talk about looking ahead. How do we actually apply these things to our practices?
All right, so we want to start out with some of our background, which was students and the pandemic. All right, so prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, research had illustrated how emotions provided meaning and motivation to the work of undergraduate students. So these emotions frequently went beyond anxiety because sometimes anxiety is an appropriate response to learning something new. Students were recognizing where their assumptions about information did not match reality, and their frustration and interest in their chosen topic fueled them as they navigated this disconnect. Suggestions to support students in this work included a focus on strength-based frameworks, reducing roadblocks to accessing information, and partnering with faculty at other departments to create and deliver information literacy instruction. The pandemic, though, brought to the surface new and previously existing mental health challenges, including anxiety and depression. Those students who belong to minority groups face this at even higher rates. Our student populations in the US are speaking more openly about their mental health and are more aware of how it affects the ways in which they interact with the world. So as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, many students experienced emergency remote teaching during their high school or undergraduate experiences. Emergency remote teaching is distinct from online instruction because emergency remote teaching is a temporary switch in instruction. It's due to a crisis. It's not intended to be as robust as fully online education because it functions as a stopgap so that education can continue, and so it should be discussed and evaluated differently. Research conducted during and after the pandemic suggests that students are changing the way that they evaluate information and paying attention to who is conducting and funding their research. Since we already had a set of interview data from 2019, Hannah and I decided to rerun our initial study in autumn of 2023 to find out how the information behaviors of students may have changed as a result of the pandemic. We were particularly interested in the emotional responses of students post the pandemic.
And that takes us to our study design and results. So before we dig into what that behavior is, we need to briefly tell you about our study design, who those students were, and how we evaluated that. As Katie mentioned, in 2017, we actually started with a survey on student information beliefs. This was a basic Likert survey, and we realized that this flat Likert data brought up a bunch of questions that could not be answered by that flat Likert data, which led us to the 2019 survey, which we added interviews in to ask some of these questions. In this survey, we distributed it to all first years enrolled and did an incentive of two $30 Visa gift cards, which resulted in 246 student responses in the Likert survey. And clearly, in 2020 through 2022, emergency teaching happened, specifically in Ohio. This was the chunk of time that we were dealing with. And we realized, oh, we have this beautiful pool of data that is pre-emergency teaching for our Gen Z students. Perhaps we should do this again and see what happens in 2023 post. And so we repeated the survey and repeated the interviews as well, trying to see what happened. So in 2019, we had 20 interviews we defined Gen Z as students born after December 31st, 1993. And all these students were first-year students of an open access regional campus of a large state flagship university in the Midwest, the Ohio State University at Newark. In 2023, we had 18 interviews. And again, all students were born after December 31st, 1993. All students were first-year students. And we added one single solitary question, which was, have you experienced emergency remote teaching in the last 3 years? And 80% of our students said they had. What we did was an inductive thematic analysis on our data. It's a method used to identify and interpret themes or patterns in data, starting with an analysis with as few preconceived notions as possible. We just wanted to see what was in the data. And so what we did was review all of our interviews and create a code book that had 10 themes and 34 codes listed underneath those. Between the two of us, we independently coded those interviews, we reviewed them, we revised our code books, we recoded them, we normed our results, and repeated this a few times till we agreed on our definitions of what our codes and our themes were. And then in 2023, we did it all over again. We kept the original code book and looked to see what else showed up, and we added 4 more codes to our list. And I know all of you are asking, well, what'd you find? What happened? So what we learned was there's some emotional responses to this research. We weren't expecting it. We didn't ask questions that pertained to it, but there they were. So before we get too far into the data, these are our emotion codes that we used in our study, as well as some of our top level categories. We found confusion being expressed, persistence. We found giving up, students having self-doubt or frustration, or being disappointed or being challenged in their work. And our top level codes, students talking about web resources above all other types. They're talking about what is credible. They're giving us indicators of what authority is. They're talking about time. They're talking about space and how it's stressful. They're talking about their assignment and how that assignment design drove how they did research. They talked about problem solving, they having no loyalty to resources, how they found help, and miscellaneous, which is oftentimes them referring to past experiences in high school. But what we're going to actually highlight are passionate persistence and problem-solving persistence, frustration at roadblocks, and then the subcategory of what is credible. So how we defined these are as follows. Frustration at roadblocks was students being frustrated to specific barriers that were not time-related. We had passionate persistence, in which students described searching for something because they needed to know the answer or wanted to know the answer. This was a personal motivation. And you can see a mentality that a student is determined to make it work. They want to know, they're going to figure it out. We have ambiguously reliable, which is perhaps my favorite code of all. It's a student truly trying to describe a source as credible, but they're not giving a good explanation why. And sometimes they're just going, yeah, it's credible. Well, how would you define that? It's credible. Okay, that sounds good. And then, of course, we have problem-solving persistence, which is different from passionate because students are describing how they experimented to find these solutions in their research, or talking about their struggles, but their persistence in trying to identify a source. And so you're not finding the passionate bit where they're personally motivated. This might be, I'm just trying to get the grade, but I'm going to do everything I can to get to that grade.
Okay, so in 2019, the codes for frustration at roadblocks and passionate persistence had a statistically significant linear relationship. It meant that these findings were connected by more than random chance. There was a positive correlation to the relationship, meaning that as students became more frustrated, they also became more passionate in overcoming the cause of their frustration. So what did this look like? Well, a lot of the data was done by for-profit companies that they collect the data and they sell it primarily to marketing firms. It makes it really hard to do research, you know? In 2023, this changed. The codes for frustration and roadblocks and ambiguously reliable had statistically significant linear relationships, and it was a negative correlation, meaning as one code decreased, the other increased. So with more students expressing frustration at roadblocks, there was less instances of that ambiguously reliable language. And it's incredibly hard to find resources with real data about vegetarianism. It's all these activism groups, which is fine, but there's no real scientifically backed data because nobody's doing any research on the benefits or consequences of vegetarianism. In 2023, we also found that problem-solving persistence and frustration with Roblox had statistically significant linear relationships, meaning as students' frustration increased, so did their problem solving. And what this looked like is kind of a student actually walking us through their problem solving. So I would modify the question a little bit, change the wording, change the words to see if the source had mentioned a specific word. And I would just make sure I would go through it and be like, I think, okay, is this mentioning my question? Is it mentioning a keyword that I mentioned, or is it not? So here are some of the top and most interesting comparisons we found between our 2019 and 2023 interview data. Frustration at Roblox, ambiguously reliable language, and problem-solving persistence are still high, and while problem-solving has gone down, it still counted as 16% of our overall responses. Passionate persistence was identified considerably less, and fewer students identified giving up, either on topics or on resources. Find source a completely different way, and find a completely different source swapped in their numbers, with more students attempting to find a source no matter what.
And that brings us back to those new codes we told you about. So they fell under the theme evaluation and started when we realized there was a trend in our 2023 data of students explicitly asking for something that was evidence-based. So they're mentioning science, facts, evidence. And when we recoded with this in mind, it was clear that students were also calling out mis and disinformation. And so that was something that had specific malicious intent. They were also talking about bias in sources. So students explicitly defining what that was or saying that term. And then students were talking about the relevance of sources, where they were explicitly mentioning or describing relevance as it relates to their source selection or deselection in some instances. This advanced language just did not appear in our 2019 data. And despite students being ambiguous still about how they described reliable information at a pretty much steady rate from 2019 to 2023, they were able to use terms beyond credible or reliable to try to explain their needs. These brand new shiny words, students were very insistent upon. So what did this look like? October started telling us, backed by research, something that has facts and science behind it, something that doesn't have opinion or bias in it. And then June was telling us something that closely answers my research question. And then they go into the most accurate information to what I'm talking about. That's like relevant.
All right, so then looking ahead, how do we incorporate these information behaviors into our teaching and reference practices? So the COVID-19 pandemic was stressful, and recent scholarship has explored how students in high school and college struggled with mental health. It is entirely possible that the reason students aren't expressing a wider range of emotions in 2023 is because they simply don't have the bandwidth. Research may not always be worth a strong emotional response. This doesn't mean students aren't working hard, just that they might be saving emotions for other parts of their life. As we were discussing the new evaluation codes, we were also reading Troy Swanson's recent book, Knowledge as a Feeling: How Neuroscience and Psychology Impact Human Information Behavior. So Swanson asks us to consider knowledge as something that includes our consciousness, which is ourselves and who we are, our overall context in which we live, while also understanding that knowledge is dynamic and always changing. He suggests that if we think about knowledge as a feeling, we can think about uncertainty and relevance in new ways. For example, how do we know when we have read enough sources for a lit review? We no longer feel uncertain. How do we know if two articles or books are related? They feel relevant. This gave us a new lens through which to examine our work. And we just want people to take maybe 10, 20 seconds here, and we'll get into the Q&A later, but think about what you know and what do you know because you feel. We look forward to hearing about that more in the Q&A.
So let's look at two of these points of change, starting with passionate persistence to problem-solving persistence. Passionate persistence appeared a lot in our 2019 interviews, but moved to problem solving in 2023 interview data, potentially demonstrating how students were less emotionally connected to their research, but they were still dedicated to getting it done. They were no less persistent. They were just less passionate. It could indicate that emergency remote teaching made students more confident in their problem solving skills. They already figured stuff out online on their own. They know how to apply it into the real world now. And perhaps this confidence propels them to search harder. Also, there was the acquisition of language clearly. They're using more sophisticated language to describe the evaluation of resources and mentioning more evidence-based needs for those resources. They've acquired more language through some means. We've all heard evidence-based tossed around as jargon in the media, and so they've picked it up. They're cognizant of what bias is and how it can influence their information far more than they previously were. And so there's shifts. There are definite poignant shifts in how students are reacting to their research world around them. So we have a couple takeaways. One of them is that problem solving bit, telling students to normalize emotions as an important part of their research process. They're having them. 2019 told us there was a lot of emotions, none of them were anxiety. 2023 is telling us that there's still some of these emotions around research, but there's less of them. But this is part of how research works. And also, like Helene said, there are multiple ways to get to an answer, and there's not one right way. And emphasizing that research is not a direct path. There's going to be a lot of different ways to get to an answer that's going to be appropriate for their needs. Also, facilitating discussions among students of how they problem solve a specific research need should actually help emphasize that. A lot of students are going to be doing different things. They're going to learn tips from each other and see that there's a lot of correct ways to do something. There's also those language shifts. Because they are using more sophisticated language, we get to use more sophisticated language in our instructional content about evaluation. That's exciting. It's exciting to know that our students have leveled up in a certain way. And so we can connect language to behavior by encouraging students to describe how they determine a source is relevant. What mental steps are they taking? This bounces us also into our beautiful references, of which we have only one slide of, but we also have added in a slide of our publications, not to toot our own horn, but because you're here because you're curious about Gen Z, and we have published our data in a few different places. And would like you to read it if you're curious. And so feel free to take a peek at this. And again, our codebook, which we are encouraging you to go take a peek at, as well as of our data, is go.osu.edu/ACRL Gen Z. We want other people to do this research. Clearly, we're just a school in Ohio that decided to do this. And while we have a wide demographic of students because of our population and our demographics of our surveyed students and our interviewed students matched very closely to that, it's not going to be a one-to-one for someone maybe in Vegas or something. And so we're encouraging you to be like, hey, maybe I can do this because we think you can.
We believe in you. All right. And thank you all for listening. And again, there's the Go link if you should need it.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I have some questions in the Q&A, but one very important question is, will the slides be shared after the presentation? So I know we have a link for one. So presenters, you can give me a thumbs up if you're willing to share it out, and we'll do it. We'll send them to Margot, and they'll go out with other stuff. So I'm going to start with the questions that are in the Q&A. And then if folks want to raise their hands and ask too, we'll go there. So this first question comes from John S. and says that interesting mention about Gen Z students not reaching out for help. Is it generational or part of library anxiety? As it seems that students in general do not want to ask. What are your thoughts?
I would like others to jump in here first because I just realized my battery on my laptop is going to die. I will be right back.
Yay, technology. Hannah and I can speak a little bit to this because we found no anxiety in interviews with students, both in 2019 and 2023. We did find that students were not necessarily asking, this isn't our other codes, which we didn't get into today, but students were not asking librarians for help, but they were asking their teachers, and they were going back to their assignments for help. So it was more of who and how they were asking for help that we found into is not, but they were not asking like repeatedly. They're like, yeah, I'm not asking the library. I'm like, all right, thanks for that. Thanks for your candidness. But it really wasn't, they weren't feeling anxiety. They were really more frustration was their big emotion, which is not bad.
No, and they just went to the easiest, I think, resource, which to them, their teacher was a click away or their roommate was around the corner. And so they went and hollered out at them and went, hey, have you done this? Have you dealt with this? Did it do the stupid thing to you too? Okay, how can we fix this? And so going to known resources, I think, was a key for what we spotted in our data, at least.
Yeah, and that gets back to the point that I was making about Gen Z being really efficient and taking the path of least resistance. And that if their roommate or their friend has already done this or seems to have more confidence with it, they're much more likely to ask them than to try to figure out what was that librarian's name and, you know, how do we email her and where, yeah, it's just a path of least resistance. But I will say that over the last 10 years, I've been having increasingly, well, not, I don't know about increasingly more, but this same conversation with my faculty colleagues around students just not asking for clarification, not asking for assistance, not asking for help, sort of as a, I don't know, a broad observational aspect of our students as a whole. I don't like to make those big, broad generalizations, but from the literature that I've read and from all the conversations I've had with everyone, there is a hesitancy to reach out and ask for help generally.
And to add to that is something that Helene said earlier, students like the interface of Canvas and that it's like all in one. And so if a librarian is not necessarily embedded in that course, so they don't have, you know, an easy way to just reach out to us, they're not really going to make that extra effort. I have noticed that I get more research consultations from the classes that I am actually embedded in the Canvas course.
I agree, me too.
All right, second question, and then we'll go to I think I saw a hand raised too. This is specifically for Helene, but I bet everybody else can weigh in on this too, because we all have some experience here. But in your opinion, are there drawbacks to tailoring library instruction in LibGuides, not quote, parentheses, to specific classes or assignments? What are the implications of that approach on long-term student outcomes related to critical thinking, evaluating sources, etc.? In other words, does that kind of instruction prepare students to perform well on their own post-college?
That is
tough.
It's a great question. But I will say that when I say that I tailor my library instruction to a specific assignment, it's not that that my lesson planning or my objectives are, you know, the student will find 3 sources in this database. It's couched within the skills, especially within the framework that we want students to be able to demonstrate, right? So if I'm talking about, especially like say, I have a whole lesson around deceptive publishing and Google Scholar and this whole thing of like why Google Scholar is your friend and why Google Scholar isn't your friend. And we talk about transparency and we talk about deceptive publishing and all of these kinds of things. And so that lesson plan is an engaged conversation that has a lot of active learning. There's a lot of components, but the LibGuide might just have, you know, a video or some links around how to do lateral searching in Wikipedia if you come upon a journal that seems sketchy, or I don't know, maybe, you know, like our open access resources that are, you know, more reliable indices. So there are the specific sources around the assignment and specific sources that the student can reference after the class. But it's within a whole lesson plan of engaging with these skills and ideas that, for me, and this is key, are transferable, right? Because so much of what I'm interested in right now is how to welcome students into the scholarly conversation by acknowledging that they already are doing this, they already know how to do this, and that there are components of this that fit into the structured scholarship of academia, these databases, you know, all of the tools that they're using in their LMS, so that when they go back to the LibGuide, it's like, oh yeah, there's that database that she was talking about. There's that video that she talked about. But it's just sort of a way for students to go back, to reference, and for me to be able to create more specificity around certain tools that they're going to need. But the larger skills that translate into that lifelong learning, they're all there, but they're not on the LibGuide necessarily. Which is why I think that's why we get away from ourselves with these LibGuides. We're like, well, they need to know this, and they need to know this, and they need to, I'm like, no, they don't. Stop doing that.
All right, I'm just going to invite the rest of our panelists to chime in on that question too, if they would like.
I can only plus one to Helene. Yes, I have nothing to add. She covered all points.
Same. And I can also share that, you know, in the usability study that I've been a part of, and we're observing students using the research guides that we've curated specifically for this study. We're giving them the task, it is spelled out. They're still going to the search box in the guide. And the first time it happened, my colleague and I looked at each other like, oh no, oh, what have we done? Because, you know, this study is, it's exhausting to be. I don't know if you've been in a usability study where you are not, you know, really engaging with them. You're just letting them. You're just hands tied to your side, just letting them. And it will be 30 minutes and they are still looking for this data set that they've been asked to look for. And we've seen them find it 10 times, but they're just not sure. And we've even linked it in the LibGuide and the Adobe page, but they're still not sure. They're going to that search box every time. So.
Every search box does the same thing. And that's why at one school I was at, we got rid of that, because you can actually hide it, because it just was so, and it's not useful. We don't use it. Nobody uses it. Get rid of it. It should just disappear from the face of the earth.
Yes.
All right, it looks like we have a hand raised from Sally Neal. And Sally, if you want to unmute, if that's, I'm assuming that's possible for participants, and ask your question.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just, thinking, I think so many things that you brought up today in these presentations really ring true. One being that the typing in a natural language question into a search box, I see that over and over again, and even more so in our first year students coming through in their first year seminar classes. So that was something I think, Piper, you talked about at the beginning. You showed in that slide. I was like, okay, it's just not me. I mean, I don't really have a question, and as I say, I'm sorry that I, raised my hand accidentally. But I mean, I think everything is good food for thought. The LibGuides, yes. I mean, overwhelming to maintain, overwhelming for the students. So that was interesting to hear that, and will be something that I'll be taking back to my librarians to discuss. So thank you.
Thank you. Technology is just always like Zoom likes to change on us. And it's just very, sometimes brings up a little bit of anxiety. Other questions, if folks want to pop those in the chat. Otherwise we'll take some, maybe like what's one, or you can even put in like, what's one key thing you're going to take away today? I'm not gonna do what I do to you, what I do to my students, but any other lingering questions, or like, what's one key thing you're taking away today? I think we all have some feelings about LibGuides. As I'm getting LibGuides questions come through my email as we're on this panel today. So.
I mean, I guess I can say one more thing, since now I figured, I've talked already, but I think that what Helene was talking about at the very end about concepts is so important. And, I've been a librarian for, 20 to 25 years. And so, I teach process, right? So, first you have your keywords, and then you do this, and then you do that. And it's very linear. And that, I think I'm really taking away from this is meeting the students where they're at. They already have some foundational skills in, searching Google and Google Scholar, and giving them wider concepts to take away. Because what struck me when that was shared was that, yeah, when they leave after 4 years here, they are not going to conduct research like I have tried to teach them. They're just not going to remember it. So what I would rather do is take the way they're searching now and having a broader discussion on, yes, when you do a Google Scholar search, why are you getting the results that you're getting, and et cetera, so that they can become better searchers based on the framework that they're coming from.
Sally, I also want to respond to that. In that I also have been a librarian for a really long time. And one of the things that I have found that doesn't work for me over and over and over again is asking students to pick a subject and then come up with keywords. Like, that's it, right? They have their subject and they're like, okay, let's create our keyword search strategy. And they look at me like I'm insane, right? Because that doesn't mean anything. That it just doesn't connect with any experience they've had, because normally what you do with Google is you type in a natural language search, you find a bunch of stuff, and then you skim for words, right? You skim for terms and phrases that jump out, and then you go back and maybe start doing the search again. And before we can even touch controlled vocabulary, we have to get a handle on what we're asking them to do, which even for us, that's not how we search, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
we do this iterative where we read and we go back and we're like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that word. We have to change this up. And I think that would be more effective in creating those more like lifelong skills that they're actually usable, especially around lateral searching. So thank you, Sally.
We have in the chat that meeting students where they are is my biggest takeaway. It feels more important now than ever, especially with the research regarding Gen Z seeking out people and sources they feel comfortable with. With that comment, I'm wondering if anybody wants to share any instructional strategies they may have for kind of like meeting students where they're at, or there are certain techniques that you use. And I'm kind of putting you all on the spot, but it seems like that's a really big thing that's come up.
I mean, I can pop in real quick. Meeting them where they're at is not trying to shoehorn our way in ways that are unnatural, which goes back to Helene's sort of like, why are they going to go to LibGuide if they can go to Canvas? Because their instructors there. And so the importance of making those connections with those instructors, with those departments, so you can embed yourself in a more natural sort of way is huge, because then you're finding them where they're looking for you. And so while it's probably a challenge and it's definitely a lift, it can be pretty meaningful to just have your name there associated with that exact assignment that you know will be looking for you. And so maybe it's you there, not a LibGuide.
I would say amen to that. And maybe it's you. I think these students really appreciate the personal connection. And then again, just easy to find, easy to link to this person. One of the strategies that I've used in first year student courses, especially, is building on that prior knowledge. Just really, it's easy, to get them in, yes, where they are, and then to help them understand that what you've been doing is fine. You're going to have to go up a little though. And so we're just going to build from there. And then utilizing the power of their peers, because they do want to see how it's done. They want to see what others are doing. And so maybe, I might sometimes rely on group work a little too much, but I really like it for this generation. Because in the feedback that I've gotten and the survey responses that I've gotten, they appreciate it. So especially early, just getting their feet, they like to hear from each other.
Yeah, we found that students were using their previous searching experiences as a map for what to do in college. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't, but they had a framework in mind, and it was getting them to kind of explain, I think in the classrooms, getting them to explain what is their framework, and then kind of walking through, okay, where does this work really well? Where are we enhancing it? And I think kind of just building on as an enhancement is very helpful for students, at least, because they are starting somewhere.
All right, I'm not really seeing any more questions in the chat. And just about, Kristen mentions finding it fascinating that research is showing a more sophisticated acquisition of language, which I think is so cool. I think that's just a really neat aspect of this. Thinking about the path of least resistance would be with Gen Z as a challenge when the librarians may be a couple of generations separated from Gen Z. I now feel that it's not like the cool young librarian anymore. I don't know about how everybody else feels, but like I had to explain what dial-up internet was this semester. And some other things where I'm like, okay, I'm now there's that generational divide a little bit. So sometimes we just make fun of our age in front of the students to get them involved. All right. So the recording and a follow-up survey is going to be sent out after this from ACRL, similar to your registration. And there is also the student learning and info. First of all, let's give a round of applause to our lovely panelists today. Virtual round of applause, however you all want to do it. Thank you all so much. I learned so much from all of you today, and I'm so thankful for you, and I appreciate you so much. So there will be some follow-up stuff coming from ACRL on this. And then on May 13th from 1 to 2:30, the Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee will be running another panel similar to this on universal design for learning and information literacy. So that information will be out on various lists if it's not already. And I just want to thank you all for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you thought it was a great time. So thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.